Hello, and welcome to QGen, an intergenerational LGBTQ plus podcast of the LGBT Community Center of Greater Cleveland. My name is Brian Lutz. I use he, him pronouns, and I am one of the QYou Program Coordinators at the center. Our mission at the LGBT Community Center of Greater Cleveland is to enrich the lives of the diverse LGBTQ plus community through support, education, advocacy, and celebration. Here at the QGen Podcast, we celebrate the lives of two individuals, a youth from QYou, which addresses the needs of queer youth ages 11 to 20, and an elder from our SAGE program, a social program that addresses the unique health and wellness needs of the LGBTQ plus community for ages 50 plus. Today we are meeting George Costanzo, he, they pronouns from QYou, and Mary Beth Bartholomew, she, her pronouns from SAGE.
Hi, Mary Beth. How are you doing?
I'm well. Nice to see you this morning and talk with you.
Nice to see you as well. So let's jump right into it. As you know, we talked about a couple of things that would be good for us to speak with each other about on this podcast. So I'll just jump right in with a question. How would you describe your childhood community? What is one of your first memories? Could you describe your childhood in 3 words?
Sure. Carefree would be, I think, the first word I would choose. And I choose that word because I did grow up in a community and household where we didn't have a lot of worries about the big world. We were taught different history back in the 50s and the 60s, but also carefree because that 70s parenting where it was generally, kind of hands-off parenting, laissez-faire, and there are both, pros and cons to that. It was there weren't many helicopter parents around, let's put it that way. So we were kind of on our own, and that felt good, at the time. It was really fun. We could leave the house at, 9 a.m. in the morning and come home because you were hungry for dinner time. And nobody really, parents weren't asking a lot of questions at the time. So it was fun. It was also a little lonely, even though I grew up in a family of 5. I had two siblings. When I think back on my childhood, I've tapped into some loneliness that I think I experienced, but I didn't know what that was for years, actually. I grew up in the middle of the Allegheny National Forest, so it did feel different, but I had no idea why. How about you, George? What was your childhood like?
Yeah, let's see. It's kind of hard to describe my entire childhood. Well, the first word that comes to mind is maybe like fun, or more precisely like imaginative. I also don't really have helicopter parents, I would say, but they were maybe still a little bit like more hands-on than what you were describing, partially because, so my sister was born when my mom was in her senior year of college, and then my dad and her, who were friends for like a couple of years before that because they went to high school with one another, they got married because my dad was, for some reason, like really hype about raising a child, which I don't know, it's kind of funny to me. And so then 3 years later, I was born, and my dad, his first job was working. It was his job right now, actually. He's worked at the same job since I was very young. Was working at a high school. And it's Nordonia High School, so it's like Macedonia, Sagamore Hills, Northfield. He's a history teacher. So he worked through my childhood, just regular teacher hours. But my mom, by the time I was born, wanted to stay home with the kids. So I don't know what her career aspirations were before my sister and I were born, but she really kind of like relished in being a full-time mom for us. And she was like the type of mom that really liked taking part in the games that we would all come up with and, and play with one another. So like, right, so like one of my first memories of when I was a child where it was we like all got in a car, and by we all I mean like my mom and my sister and I got in a car, and so I must have been like 3 at the time, and my sister would have been 6, and my mom we drove to the center of Brecksville, which I grew up in Broadview Heights. Brecksville and Broadview Heights are kind of like inextricably linked towns. And every stoplight, she would ask either my sister or I which way she should turn. And at the end of deciding where we were going to turn, we were going to have like some big fun day adventure or something like that. And I remember that day we ended up in like Hinckley somehow, near like a little waterfall area. And I don't know, it was just a lot of fun. So my mom liked doing things like that. Thinking of another word, one that might contrast the fun and imagination. I also think stressful was could describe some of my childhood. So from the time that I was really, really young, my parents were both pretty upfront about worrying about how much money we had. I think part of that is because so growing up in a town like Brecksville, it's like really, really old. There's a lot of old money there. It's kind of like a small conservative town. It's where both of my parents went to high school. That's where I ended up going to school. My mom transferred there from, she used to live in Chicago, but big crazy situation got her out of Chicago. And there was always this sense of, especially because my mom wasn't working, she was like, I want to be here to come take care of the kids, but like I'm just constantly stressed about how much money we have. So I was maybe not, like I was kind of maybe like sheltered from like how hard the world could be, but like was always reminded about how difficult it would be once I grew up and had to get out of there. So I don't know, that's another thing. And yeah, I'm trying to think of like ways that like me being in touch with like my LGBTQ plus or my queer identity kind of manifested from when I was younger, but I don't know. I think in a weird way, my parents always sort of like fostered that without even really knowing it. Like from the time that I was 7 on, I was doing like community theater productions. And that gave me like my own little time and space, and there were a lot of like gay people in theater. So I don't know. I also kind of felt like I had like a sense of independence in like what I like to do in my leisure time. But I've probably gone on enough about that. Another question for you would be, what were maybe 3 of the most historical, or yeah, what were 3 of the most historical events that occurred while you were growing up?
Well, I think I'm going to talk about one event that happened before I was born, and probably should have talked about this at the beginning of this podcast. I think the reason for some of the, well, I don't think, the reason for some of the stress and sort of carefree nature of growing up is definitely tied to the fact that 4 years before I was born, when my parents were 18 and 20 years old, my father was deer hunting in Pennsylvania, and he was accidentally shot in the head. And he survived, obviously, but he was he was never the same. So that definitely, it's funny, almost funny to me that I didn't talk about this. And I think the reason we don't talk about it, or I don't talk about it, is because we didn't talk about it as a family very much. My parents My father had surgery and he was sent home. They got married, and there was no psychotherapy, there was no occupational therapy, there was no family therapy. It was before my generation, came along, and my parents' generation just didn't do that. Or perhaps we just didn't know that much about head and brain injuries at the time. So I cheated a little bit there with that question, I guess, and talked about maybe a personal historical event before I was born. And it definitely affected all of us. And I think, I sort of felt like I was on my own because my mother had her hands full. She had to figure out how to, she had 3 kids before she was 26, and a head injured husband. So she was really busy. And then they kind of switched gender roles a little bit. My mother eventually became the major giver, breadwinner rather, and my father was unique, I think, for being a dad in the 50s. He was a dad who actually did change our diapers and took us out for walks and hikes and camping and all that good stuff. So it was kind of it was very unusual way to grow up. But skipping back, back to the original question about historical events, I would say kind of 3 together. I was in 3rd grade, I guess 5th grade and 8th grades when I think, in order to think about my history here, the assassinations of JFK, RFK, and MLK were certainly big historical events for the time. And in 3rd grade, I don't, of course, I couldn't really grasp, what had really happened. But I do remember thinking and watching about what all the adults were doing, just television footage of adults, just breaking down and crying. And my recollection actually of JFK was I wanted him to win the election a couple years previous to his assassination because his wife had just had a baby, and I thought that was kind of cool. I wanted that guy to be our president. I wonder sometimes if those 3 events kind of created some of the cynicism that certainly seemed to take root in our culture. I remember my brother was really interested in going to law school and becoming an attorney, but I think those events, and then the next one I'll mention, which was Watergate, kind of really started to sour people on our government and not trust our government. So that would be the next one, I guess. Watergate was it's hard to, we can put that in perspective now, given what's occurred in the last 4 years. What we would give to just have Watergate happening right now. And then, of course, that led to the resignation of a president, which was a very, very big deal at the time. How about your teenage years, George? What were your teenage years like?
Oh, my teenage years. I don't know. They're bygone. Good riddance. But yeah. So let's see. What year would I first become a teenager? I think it might have been like 2000 and let's say 2010. I'm 24 now. I was born in 96. So that, I think I would have been 14 at some point in 2010. And that's like, 13, you're not really a teenager. Those were some rough times. To bring it back to historical events that might have informed some of those things, I don't know. I want to be able to bring up historical events that were like super positive, but I can only really think of tragedies that like changed everything. And I wonder if people have similar experiences or if that's just, I don't know. So the housing market crashed in 2008, which was a huge deal, and it was a deal in a way that like my 14-year-old, well, I would have been 12 at the time, my 12-year-old mind couldn't really comprehend. And my family lost a lot of money because my parents were trying to do this thing where, like, my dad grew up in an old school Sicilian family, and so his parents were immigrants. They both moved here when they were very, very young. And my grandfather was a bricklayer, so built houses and stuff like that. And I think my dad had always been interested in taking up that craft. He likes being a handyman. He likes renovating things. So my mom and my dad were both trying to buy properties in like the Slavic village and sort of like flip houses and rent them out to people. So then when the housing market crashed, they both sort of felt like, you know, their whole world was over and that they had invested all of their money and lost it. And so if they felt like they didn't have money before, it was like much worse after that. I mean, at the end of the day, we were fine. But I think they were both, that's when my mom decided she had to start working again. So I had maybe like a little bit more like, or a little bit less, because I said earlier my parents weren't helicopter parents, but like my mom was always around. But so then when she wasn't around, I started pulling more shenanigans and hanging out with different crowds of people. So like from the time that I was very young, I was like maybe doing like seedier activities, which in Brecksville would be like, I don't know, like going like rock hopping is what it was called. From like after school, you would walk over to, there's a branch of the Metro Parks in Brecksville, where they have a river and some like pretty like high ledges, and like all of the teens would like jump off the high ledges into the water and do other recreational activities in the area at the time. So I would go hang out with those people. And I think I also like got a phone sometime around being like maybe like 13. So getting more invested in like social circles at school rather than like mostly spending my time with my family. And so I definitely kept more secrets. Like, I mean, I think, so I don't know. I was definitely keeping more secrets. I was pulling more shenanigans and stuff like that. Yeah. And then, I mean, like things like changed pretty quickly after I came out of the closet. My parents actually asked me sometime around when I was like 13 or 14, and I told them, and it shattered them. Like my mom glitched out. Like she had a hard time accepting it. Like I got the like, are you sure question like over and over again. And like she was, I don't know, she was very like, she was hoping that it would all like just be a farce and that like she just couldn't believe what she was seeing. My dad had a lot easier of a time accepting it, but like I remember he like on the day that I told my mom decided she was going to tell my dad. My dad, I was in my room, he came into my room and he was sobbing, which is one of maybe 2-3 times in my life that I've ever seen my dad cry. And like gave me a big hug, also one of 2 or 3 times that ever happened. I think. And he was just like, I want you to know that I'm not like upset with you, and I don't like want you to think that I'm like mad at you. Like I just know that like your life in the world is going to be like so much harder from here on out. And at the time I thought that was kind of sweet. Getting a little bit older and having some perspective on it, like I'm kind of like, I don't know, I've been gay and my life like been hard, stay hard. You know, I just like don't have to like keep a big secret from everyone about it. So that definitely changed things. It gave me like a little bit more, I don't know. They were supportive in this way that they were like my mom wanted to be a P flag mom and did that for like 2 meetings and felt really good about herself, but then was sort of like, I'm the expert on gay people and like this is everything that I need to know. And I think to a certain extent they were like, this is like going to be like a journey that George has that like we're not going to be able to fully understand, and they sort of accepted that, which like at the end of the day is fine with me. So I made friends closer to like the west side of Cleveland. I started volunteering for Near West Theater. I started yeah, I don't know. I was doing less like seedy activities and doing more like identity discovery activities and like trying to like live the life of a gay person. And I kind of took that away from my hometown because I was still closeted to most of the people around me. I don't know. That's what were your teen years like is a really hard question because it was an age of like rapid change and I don't know, and growth, I guess. I hope. What were your teen years like, Mary Beth?
I agree. It is a tough question because we're going through so much change physically, emotionally, mentally. It's a very difficult period of temporary insanity, perhaps, being a teenager. My teenage years were really a mixed bag. I had a lot of fun. It was the 70s and fun because I'm thinking back to one of the first questions. We were kind of carefree and on our own. So there was a lot of mischief as well, which comes with the territory, I suppose, of being a teenager, testing those boundaries. And the reason you have boundaries is, so you don't fall off the side of the table. I think what I found, I wasn't, a wild teenager or anything like that, but I also didn't sense that there was a boundary with my family. It was kind of on my own. Thank God I did not have maybe any bad genes, around addiction or alcohol. I was able to get out of that period, but it was because it was definitely a period of lots of self-medication. And again, I didn't know that at the time because everybody was partying, or at least we thought everybody was. I don't think that's accurate, but it felt like it at the time. For me, though, with that 2020 hindsight, I know now that I was self-medicating because I could not deal with this kind of unusual, strange feeling of being different. It was really, really internalized. We did have a lot of fun. And I think what really saved me, it's always really sad to me when I hear about mostly public schools cutting the arts. You mentioned the arts, George. I think really one of the things anyway was the fact that I took advantage of an opportunity to get involved in singing in our church choir and my high school, junior high and senior high school choir. There's nothing like singing harmony with your peers. It's just a glorious thing to participate in and listen to as well. At least we hope people enjoy listening to it. So that really saved me. And a couple of teachers kind of took me under their wing and really became good. I was able to, at least I was smart enough to recognize the mentors, who were kind of reaching out to me. And one was a choral director. And he took about 10 of us when I was in 9th grade, and we formed a little folk band. And because I was playing the guitar a little bit, and we would travel to different high schools. I grew up in Pennsylvania, different high schools, and perform our folk music from the 60s and 70s. And there's a lot of great music to perform during that time because all the protest songs that were tied to the folk scene and what was happening in Vietnam. I did not come out as a teenager, so I was still. I went into my late 20s actually before it became enough to talk to my parents about being a lesbian. I remember actually right after college, I was substitute teaching in a school. I was reading during some downtime. I was reading an article. It was probably about Barney Frank, who was a senator at the time. He had just come out as a senator, and that was a really, really, really big deal. And I remember reading that article, thinking to myself, I was probably 23 years old, that I didn't think I was ever. He talked about this tremendous weight being lifted from his shoulders when he came out, even though it was very scary because he was still serving in the Senate, and it was still the 70s. I remember thinking that I was never, ever going to experience that. But I did not see a path to coming out. I didn't feel safe. And a lot of it, most of it was, internalized homophobia. There were no role models. It wasn't discussed. There was no internet. You couldn't find stuff online about being LGBT. There was a really popular satire on television called All in the Family. And it was radical for the time because they got into all kinds of issues, abortion and homosexuality. I remember watching the show one night with my parents, and the main character, Archie Bunker, had befriended this big macho guy that he met at a bar. I don't really recall precisely the storyline, but long story short, this big macho guy that Archie just loved turned out to be gay. And when that storyline appeared on the television show, my mother turned off the TV. So that definitely shut me down and made me believe that this was a conversation I was never going to be able to have with my parents. I was in high school at that time, but I have a very strong recollection of that act, my mother shutting the TV down. She didn't want us to be subjected to that kind of material on television. Yeah, it would be another 10 years almost before I would actually come out to my mother first. But the teenage years, they were, it's a tough time for everybody. I think maybe like most people, I couldn't even verbalize it. I still didn't know what it was. I just stuffed all those feelings. And I remember in elementary school having the big crush on Lily Tomlin on Laugh-In, which was a big variety show. Loved Lily Tomlin, but I didn't know why. So that kind of recaps my adolescence. I got out alive and did okay, but a little bit of a late bloomer because I had all this other stuff that I wasn't dealing with. So I had to deal with a lot of stuff in my later 20s and early 30s. It turned out okay. How old was I when I came out? I think I was 29 years old when I had a conversation with my mother. And I probably didn't pick the best time. She was driving a car. So I told her, and my siblings actually had been encouraging me to let my parents know because my siblings knew. I had come out to my siblings, and they were telling me that my parents knew, but they didn't want to ask me because they didn't want to put me in an awkward position. So I felt fairly safe by the time I did come out to my mom in the car that day. Her first reaction was, that's the only thing that makes me sad is that I thought you would always be a good mom. Went right to that grandparent thing, right? And the funny story about that is that I did end up having two children about 15 years later, and I did become a lesbian mom in the 90s, and it felt kind of radical at the time because we just moved to Cleveland from San Francisco. So my mother did get that wish, and we gave her two grandchildren, two boys. And of course, I was very lucky, even though my mother turned off that All in the Family episode back in the 60s. I was totally embraced by my family, my nuclear family, my extended family, all that worry for nothing. But I knew that that wasn't the case for everyone. But for me, I was just blessed and lucky that it was not a big deal, even though my mother did kind of have to go through her own kind of coming out to her friends, being a mother of a lesbian in a small town. One kind of funny thing that she did when our first son was born, she wanted to put a birth announcement in their local paper, this small town in Pennsylvania. and the editor wouldn't do it. This was 1996. Because she mentioned, in this birth announcement, there were two women as parents, and my mother just became this radical person. She marched into the offices of this local newspaper, demanded that they put this birth announcement in the local paper, which they did. But at the same time, I was a little horrified because I still had a lot of friends back in my hometown who I wasn't out to. So my mother continued to out me as well. Fortunately, I'd had a lot of therapy at that time. I really didn't care, but it was a little it was a little surprising that she did that without speaking to me about it. But at the same time, I was really proud of my mom for sticking up for us, and it was kind of her way of coming out to her friends as well as a parent, and kind of sticking it to the world, I think, and saying, you better be okay with it. So that was kind of fun. But the coming out process, I thought it was only going to come out once, right? You get a little bit older, you realize it's a lifelong thing that you do, because you meet new people all of the time. And once we had kids, every year, new teachers, new coaches for our kids, you had to just keep coming out. And I think one thing having kids does to parents is it can force us to be very honest. I remember standing in a line I don't know if it was a grocery store or I'm not sure, but my small kids were with me, and someone said something to me about my husband. And my kids were with me, they were listening. And I knew that if I just ignored that question, or made something up just to not have to deal with it, that would be sending a very bad message to my kids. So our kids forced us to keep coming out over and over again too, because they're listening. So that was something that I learned, as I got older, that it's a lifelong thing, coming out to new people. And the culture had changed a little, it was changing a little bit too. The culture was, way ahead of the politicians. We started to see more, stories about being LGBT and LGBT parenting. Still didn't have the internet, not for a while yet, but it became easier. People became a little more, accepting with time. So that's kind of my short coming out story, maybe not so short coming out story, and describing my teenage years. When did you know that you found kind of you alluded to this, you found a community, George, I think in theater and a few other areas. Where else did you know that you had found your LGBT community in your experiences with theater? Did you feel like ta-da, eureka, here I am in this community at that point?
Yeah, so because I had done theater since from the time that I was very young, I don't know if it's accurate to say that I found a community there. I think it's more like the theater was always a safe space. And I don't know, I think my journey to feeling like a part of the LGBT community was more about just seeing myself as an LGBTQ plus person, and I don't know, really kind of being comfortable with that being a huge part of my identity. I think it's really hard to explain. Let me take it back a little bit. So when I was coming out, so I came out to my parents when I was very young. That was its own process, and then I didn't quote unquote come out, and I'm saying quote unquote because you're right, it's something that you do in every little action with every new person that you meet all of the time. But growing up in a small community, before I told people in my small community and let it be the hot gossip of the week, I don't know, I waited a couple of years. It wasn't until I was like either 17 or 18 during my senior year of high school. And I think a lot of that fear came from not wanting people's like perception of me to change, when in fact nothing about me had changed. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't like the idea of sharing with people that I've known all my life, because you go to like kindergarten with the people you're in high school with at the public school that I went to, sharing with them this detail about my life and having them be like, oh, George is gay, so this is how George is now. I have to like understand George in an entirely different way. And I didn't really want to like go through that change. And I guess it took me a while to like really realize that like I just had been gay the whole time, and that like I don't know, I'm not really changing, and like nothing that I'm gonna do is gonna change, and like maybe people are going to have to adjust to like me being like honest and like forthright about like my queerness, but I don't think they're going to start recognizing me as queer in ways that I wasn't before. So for me, I mean, I guess the first time that I really found a community was when I like started dating my first boyfriend when I was maybe I started when I was like 16 or 17. I can't remember exactly when it was, but we met through Near West Theater. I was like volunteering and like organizing stuff for their front of house. He was a volunteer one night, and I was kind of coordinating where a lot of the volunteers would go. And I remember he was like flirting with me when I saw him like the evening of one of like the productions, and I was like, I don't know who this person is. I'm not interested. Like, I have a job to do. And then later that evening, the cast and everyone who was volunteering went out to a hookah bar called Kanzamon, which also turns into like a dance club on the weekends. And I was just having a really bad night. And he like came up to me at some point and like asked if I wanted to dance, and I was like, no, I want to go home. And that was the last time I saw it. But then a couple of months later, I reached out because I would like had started to entertain the idea of like coming out to my like close friends. And I think like at the end of the day, like even though I like was out to my family, like I just like really did not have like practice like being out and talking about gay things with like my peers. Does that make sense? I don't know. So I just wanted to like talk to someone where I could like be like fully honest about my sexuality, who I could be fully honest about my sexuality with. And so I don't know, we started hanging out, we started dating, we dated for like a year. I felt like head over heels in love with him. He was a year older than me, so by the time we were going into my senior year, he had to go to college, and we broke up, and I was devastated. By that point, I had already come out to like maybe 2 or 3 of my like close friend circle, because like I would want to hang out with them and my boyfriend, and I wanted to introduce them to one another. So I think at some point, having that relationship with someone who went to a different school and like meeting people in his community and being like introduced as a gay man to like all of the people in his community, and I don't know, just like really wearing that for a while, like I started to like realize how much bigger the world was and how much longer my life was going to be. And I just like stopped really caring about how people perceived me in the small community that I was in, because I think for a while, like when you're in high school, you're like, this is everything, this is my life. So I don't know, I think it was honestly also like a way that I chose to cope with like not being in a relationship with him anymore, because I was super broken up about that, and I was like, I got to make some changes in my life, I'm going to come out of the closet. So I just told someone, one of the most gossipy girls that I knew in my like first period Spanish class. I was like, Ashley, I have something to say. and I was like, and she's gonna tell everyone, and I don't have to do most of the work. And then sure enough, by like fifth period, I went to my AP government class, and my teacher, Mrs. Monteleone, she, like, I got there and she was just bawling. She was like, I'm just so proud of you, and that, like, this is just such an amazing thing, and to know that, like, you can, like, feel like you can be open and honest, and like this environment is so special to me. And and I was like, okay, so if Miss Monteleone knows, like, everyone knows at this point. But I mean, I just don't think I like really cared at that point. And it wasn't because I felt like it wasn't because I felt like I had my own community outside of that. It was because, like, I felt like I was a part of a larger community of LGBTQ plus people, and that I could, like, kind of take that with me wherever I was, and that I'd always be able to find it if I was looking for. I'm speaking about community in really abstract ways right now, but I don't know. I think that's because community is an abstract concept. I mean, the first time I went to the center was the LGBT center in Cleveland, where we both work. Mary Beth was, I think it was like sometime in like 2015, maybe, when gay marriage was legalized. And I don't know, I just remember going down there, and like maybe I went to like one session of QYou, whatever iteration I was taking at the time. I remember like meeting some people in a circle, very a la drop-in, check-in. And then I was like, I'm kind of more interested in volunteering. So I signed up to volunteer, or like I signed up to like march in one of the pride parades or something like that. I have pictures. I'll be able to like track down exactly when this happened. But yeah, I don't know. That's when I sort of felt like, yeah, I didn't necessarily need to feel like I was now, like, that was now my community. It was that I could feel like I could always like go back to that community whenever I needed to, or I don't know. It's hard to explain. When did you feel like you first discovered your LGBT community?
Time I came out to my parents, I was living in State College, Pennsylvania, where Penn State is located. And I was teaching school and learned about a farmhouse. And the farmhouse was occupied by all of these mysterious lesbians, apparently. And I met a woman who, I'm not sure if she lived there at the time, but she was friends with a lot of the women who lived at this very scary, exciting farmhouse that I was imagining in my brain. And eventually I ended up visiting this farmhouse, becoming friends with a lot of the folks who had lived there and were living there at the time. And it was so exciting. I felt like, oh, that weight was actually being lifted from my shoulders finally. Yet I was petrified at the same time, because I still felt like a big outsider, and this was a pretty cliquey group of people. With a very interesting kind of history of its own. The farmhouse to date, it's still there, has been in the lesbian community for 48 years. So it has this amazing history. And a few years later, I actually ended up living there for a while, which was really fun. And we've had a couple of reunions the last 10 years or so. One year I took a flip chart and we charted all the incestuous relationships that had taken place among all the people who lived there, kind of lived there, wanted to live there. It was pretty funny. But at the same time, up until that time, I was in my late 20s at the time, I had a few circles of friends who were straight. And I found myself kind of deserting them a little bit and isolating myself from those friendships, because I was still afraid. I was afraid that these friendships that meant the world to me would die, and that these people would reject me. Finally dawned on me that I was losing them anyway, because I was rejecting them and hiding from them. And over time, reacquainted myself with all those friends, and learned that I had wasted my time worrying all those years. And those two worlds uh, melted together, and it's a beautiful thing. And I was healthy and accepting, and my family was accepting, and my straight friends were great. But the farmhouse was definitely the first community that I felt like, oh my God, I found my people. There were no LGBT centers around, and it was going to be another 5 years, I think, I'm guessing, before email was presented to the rest of us. So it was still very isolating, but it was a really, really enlightening time for me to have found that community, and then later to learn that my straight friends were cool, and most of them knew anyway. Just had never been confirmed. So things finally were coming together in a very, very nice way. George, are there any things that have surprised you about coming out, being out?
Well, first I want to say, when you describe community like that, that makes me feel like I have not discovered community yet. Yeah, I don't know. I gotta find me a farmhouse, but I don't know. We'll see. So you said, has anything surprised me about coming out, being out? One thing that has surprised me. I don't know if anything surprised me, I'm gonna be honest. I mean, I guess maybe that it just, I kind of agree with what you were saying like earlier, at some point, I forget which question I asked, but when you had this feeling like you would never be able to come out of the closet, like you just did not know if that was going to be a possibility for you, if that was going to be a reality that you could. Yeah, I think I had definitely a similar experience. Like it's crazy the way that you can rationalize as like a young person. Like, I'm just never going to be out of the closet. Like, I'm just never going to talk about this or be open about this, at least with like anyone in my life ever. And so I think I'm to a certain degree like surprised about like how easy it was to just like say it and then just continue living my life and like not having anything really be that dramatically different. Like, it would honestly, it would be cooler if everything was actually dramatically like, I'm like looking for a bigger change in my life from coming out of the closet, but no, it's really, I don't know, it's sort of it's a much smaller thing, I think, than people, because like once you come out and you're like, you commit yourself to being comfortable with yourself and being comfortable with your sexuality, because I mean, ultimately, I mean, the big coming out is the coming out that you do to yourself, where you're like, I'm gonna live this way, like this is how my life is gonna be, I'm gonna be cool with myself being gay. That's the biggest coming out that you have to do. I don't know. Yeah. Once you do that, it's a lot easier to just move forward with your life than I think you could have expected it would have been before doing that. How about you? Anything surprise you?
I guess there was so much acceptance and support. That was a little bit of a surprise. The biggest surprise was the thing that I worried those years didn't happen. The sky did not fall in on top of me, and life got better. George, it's really been nice speaking with you. It was fun learning a little bit more about your life and talking about these historical events, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you for participating in this today. Do you have anything else that you want to add?
No, just thank you, Mary Beth. I think yeah, I don't know. I like speaking with queer elders because it always makes me a lot more excited for my future. I don't know if that makes sense. But yeah, it's true. Do you have any final thoughts about this interview process? Any other last things you want to share?
Well, I'll share just kind of the reverse end of what you said. I love learning about, I love talking to people from younger generations because it helps build all these bridges. We don't, we don't learn LGBT history in school. Maybe that'll change someday, but I love learning about the experiences of younger people. I can pretend I'm kind of hip, but I know that I'm not as cool as I used to be, as the song goes. Thank you.
Thank you to Mary Beth Bartholomew and George Costanzo for their courage to share their stories. And special thanks to the staff and volunteers at the LGBT Community Center of Greater Cleveland, to our funders and donors of the center, to our community partners, and to you, our listeners. For more information about how to support the center, please visit our website at lgbtcleveland.org. And as always, be safe. We care about you.